Welcome and thanks for joining us for part two of our panel discussion with Dr. Ed Mays. He's Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Infrastructure and Support Services, also the Chief of Enterprise Infrastructure at Customs and Border Protection. Richard Clark is the Chief Technology Officer for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and Matt Guillabode, Product Development Director for the Global Security Products Division at Leidos. And good to have you all back here. And Matt, I want to start with you. Looking ahead, what should agencies do to plan for the next couple of years? Because the technology is in flux, the use of cloud is in flux, and we're seeing all of these RPA and AI, as some of the Fed's guests alluded to in the first half of the panel. But what are some, I don't know, best practices you're seeing for cloud planning for the next generation of application and data deployment?
Sure, thanks, Tom. Well, I think from our perspective, the concept of continuing to adopt cloud native architectures and microservices-based approaches lends itself well to future proofing. And then that goes along with continuing to leverage containerization technologies that allow deployment and management of services across all these sort of geographic areas we've been discussing today, from the edge, to the cloud, again in a future-proof way. And then certainly with the growth of data that's being produced at the edge and the value of applying AI at the edge, definitely looking at deploying serverless computing and those edge AI capabilities to further support that real-time data analysis in the field in support of officer decision-making.
All right, so that is quite a list of technologies that are coming on. Serverless computing, agencies are somewhat into containerizing their workloads, and that gives them portability. And I think we should probably also throw in there the increasing multi-cloud and play nice together idea that people are seeking from the cloud. So, Mr. Clark, let's start with you on what are you seeing ahead in the next fiscal year, couple of years? And the money will come at some point from Congress, but you still got to make your plans anyway.
Yeah, we hope that the money will come at some point. We've actually engaged with them to try to make certain that there's a good understanding on the change in how you capitalize the systems in the cloud, because you're no longer buying big pieces of infrastructure. I think Matt hit a lot of the items that we're working on as well. Between containerization and serverless, I think there's a lot of interest in that. So we've got a lot of active work going on in containerization, but as I like to tell teams, if you're going to do all of the work that it makes to have a well-contained application, you should consider just going that extra flight of stairs or that few extra feet and go serverless, because we think that that will give you even more benefits than just going to containers. I think our architecture is well set so that when we're in containers, we'll be able to move and pivot easily, and looking to try to extend some of that cloud independence across the different providers as well.
And I imagine using containerized workloads and containerized software functions, would that enable it faster redeployment of those into those new applications you were talking about, when you're just mixing and matching sets of containers in some ways?
Exactly. So a big part of that is breaking down the application into some of the component services, making certain that those can all run the way we want to, so that at 3 a.m. on Christmas Eve, when there's only one guy logged into the system, we're not running infrastructure that's designed to support 6,000 users or whatever. So breaking that down and compartmentalizing that so that we can have discrete and a more trough-based use consumption, so that the peak during the day when everyone is logged on looks nothing like it does in the middle of the night or holiday weekends.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I wanted to ask you too, Dr. Mays, because when people thought of cloud initially, the idea was to get away from capital expenditures and get to steady operating expenditures. And now agencies have found, well, that's not so cheap either. In some cases, a pure operating sense, and you're only 67% of the way there, but you're moving more and more toward the cloud. So that idea of even using RPA and AI to control the utilization minute by minute, hour by hour, day by day to optimize costs? Not to give you the answer, but is that type of thing you're looking at for the year ahead? And tell us what else you're planning.
So absolutely. And we've always looked at this, right? That's why we didn't make that first, lift and shift sort of move to the cloud, right? We looked at, how are we going to be, economically efficient, if you will. Now we've got a long way to go. I will tell you, we said we're only 68% or so, but our 68% is probably bigger than most of Homeland Security writ large, right? So it's not a small thing. It's actually incredibly large. Now, with respect to that, we are definitely looking at all the technologies that help us manage our cost, right? And whether that's being able to reduce our footprint in the cloud based on utilization, but you also still have to have that capacity, which is great with the cloud in terms of elasticity, right? When you've got an increase in demand signal where you have to go pretty quickly to meet that. And we see that often. There are a lot of, I'll call them black swans, things that happen in our environment that no one thought was going to be, occurring, and it happens, right? So we have to be ready for those. So our future, though, the things that we're going to be looking at for the next, year or two are going to focus around customer experience. Now, customer experience in the cloud, is one of those things that's absolutely critical to ensure that you get that cross-cutting thread that allows your customer base, your users, to actually access the services they need in a very easy manner, right? It's got to be ease of use got to be the number one thing in addition to security. So pushing that out to the edge and making sure that, we heard earlier about where sensors are, where command and control centers are, and having that capability pushed out to that level right near those sensors or data collectors that are in the field. The other big thing is AI. Our organization is one of the leaders in AI. We actually just had an AI day today here at OIT and CBP, showing our capabilities, our plans for growth. And that includes, on the edge, that includes the things that we're doing inside of our development. Pretty important to us. We've got to think about at least 40 AI programs that are underway, and probably another 140 or so RPA efforts as well. So that's a big thing to us. The other thing that's from a technical perspective that's important to me is we're also starting to look internally at, how do we transmit data in the cloud, and when I mention that, I'm talking about actual security, right? Everyone's moving towards zero trust, and that includes us, right? We've got a big plan that we're following, and we're trying to make sure we meet all of these gates with respect to zero trust. But we're also looking at post-quantum computing. We've got a project on the way that says, how do I do this for the cloud, right? And the next thing, I think, delivery of cloud services. One of those things, and that is a cloud services brokerage. We've created an organization inside of OIT called Enterprise Cloud Services. And because we can't manage the cloud like we used to manage the data centers, right? It's a different capability. And we're looking at how do we do that effectively? How do we do the cost benefit analysis along the way, looking at the architectures with the application development teams and our stakeholders. These are things that we're doing different now that I think is going to change the value proposition for our trusted partners and our stakeholders.
All right. And I wanted to ask about something we've touched on, I think, indirectly a lot. And that is, you mentioned you work with ICE and also with Commerce Department. And I think all of the agencies are really interagency operations now. Almost all major mission areas require more than one agency besides the mission owner. And I wanted to ask about cloud and enabling interagency sharing, because agencies are still agencies and there are still fiefdoms, there's still stovepipes, and yet the cloud is this common medium to a much greater extent than people's own data centers ever could have been. So Matt, why don't we ask you what you're seeing first with respect to that interagency aspect? Can that be enabled by the cloud? And is it simply a technology thing, or maybe there's a cultural kind of willingness to share more than we've seen often in the decades past among agencies.
From our perspective, we've definitely seen cloud as, providing tremendous opportunities for collaboration, not just among government agencies, but among, non-government partners, and sometimes, U.S. government to other governments. One recent example I can cite is a pilot project we did for DHS, where the Korean government is sharing baggage scan images from a foreign location to CBP and TSA in advance of the flight's arrival in the United States. I think that's an example that really demonstrates how cloud enables data sharing. And of course, there are many considerations that go into that: the security aspect, privacy, data, data formats and standardization around interoperability. But absolutely, cloud is facilitating collaboration.
All right. And Richard, what's going on with actual sharing from your standpoint at ICE? And how does cloud help interagency cooperation, data sharing, mission cooperation?
Well, internal to DHS, I think, the cloud-based collaboration tools are great. And, I don't hesitate. I will video chat somebody long before I'll pick up the phone and cold call them that way. We still run into challenges outside of DHS, I think, and there's a lot of work being done by the vendors to figure out how they want to mediate the security requirements for what they're calling business to business connections, right? So we still end up on the phone, I think, sometimes to FBI because they choose to run their environment in a slightly different security envelope than is reasonably connected to ours. So I think some progress is being made on the tools there. I think there's certainly more to do there. But certainly within DHS, I think the cloud-based collaboration tools have been a boon for that kind of working together and interoperability.
All right. Ed Mays?
I definitely concur. We are using several collaboration tools. And as mentioned earlier, with the FBI and others, we're now being able to work with them and share data, which is really important, data that we weren't able to share before. And I think the cloud has definitely facilitated that because, again, we're all using a lot of very, very similar tools that are very standardized, which helps us along the way. So I think we're in a very good place compared to maybe where we were, 3-4 years ago.
Well, I wanted to ask you about automation of data sharing among agencies, because I keep coming back to the CBP and commerce. And there are a lot of things, a lot of applications, a lot of missions with respect to international trade that you have in common. And it's hard to picture, each respective agency being able to do this without the other one. And is that automated in some fashion? How do you get the data from CBP to commerce and vice versa? And does the cloud enable that?
So with respect to commerce, I think that's all automated. But I would like to just take a step back for a moment. You mentioned automation, and because earlier I talked to you about scope and scale, right? When we talk about automation, and you ask many of the other organizations in terms of cyber hygiene and things like that, and maybe how many patches they do per year, right? And many of them, I will just say, large organizations, large agencies, will say, yeah, we do maybe 100,000, and I here at CBP, we do 40 million. And I just wanted to show, that's a difference, right? And it's huge. When we look at shifting back to data, one of the things is, and that's all driven by automation. We have focused highly on automation, right? But when I look at some of the applications that we had, the Unified Immigration Program, that's one of the ones where we share data in an automated fashion, and big kudos to ICE because they're our partners in that. Without them, that would not be a great success, the success that it is today. But yeah, these are things now where we're sharing data in an automated fashion, and I will also give kudos to DHS headquarters, our current CIO, Mr. Heisen, and our CIO over here, Sanjeev Bagwalia, that they made it a focus. And we're doing a lot better than we have in the past. And, do the work once and share it many times, right? Having centralized sort of data sources. So I think we're definitely focusing on automation in the correct way.
And Matt, with respect to deploying applications to the public, and both CBP and ICE have very much in the way of public-facing applications. I've used some of them myself, and they work pretty well, by the way. But there is always the question of identity, credentialing, security. Is this enhanced by the cloud, or does the cloud simply replace one set of security concerns and required practices with another set of concerns and required practices? Or does it enhance security in some manner?
Well, the cybersecurity landscape continues to evolve, and so I think it's important that as that happens, that we are working closely in coordination with our agency partners to ensure that any cloud instances and system deployments are conforming to the necessary cybersecurity requirements. I think, one of the aspects of our discussion regarding edge is clearly that as that fabric between the cloud and the edge gets more interconnected, the way those security boundaries are defined and how that factors into the authorization process, I think is further going to require coordination. So from that perspective, I think it is something that's going to drive increased coordination between us and agency partners. Yeah.
Okay, same question on the security aspect of this, of deploying public-facing applications. What have you learned, and how has the cloud changed your approach? Richard Clark?
I don't think that we've had much of a change with that. There's a lot that goes into the security of our applications and our data, because the data is very important, and that's really our prized asset here at ICE. There's a small tax that the security envelope puts around it, but I don't think it is appreciably changed as a result of the fact that we have the public-facing applications there. As far as the customer experience, I think we're doing a lot to try to improve the customer experience. I know DHS signed an enterprise agreement with login.gov so that we can try to simplify and standardize on how we credential the non-citizen in. And I know that we may end up becoming an identity provider to the non-citizens, because there's some questions about, if the immigration process is really to determine the identity of a person coming in, that's different than the average taxpayer citizen of the United States who's trying to interact with the services. So, I don't think it has changed appreciably the security envelope, but we are spending a lot of time and learning from the experience of our other sister agencies, right? We have some work going on now, and we're trying to make certain that we get out with the NGOs and make certain that we can get some feedback from actual users of the application, so that we're less likely to run into adverse publicity down the line as a result of that.
Sure. And Dr. Mays, you mentioned customer experience as the next kind of focus there. Maybe elaborate on what that means, what the security aspects of that are, and what else?
Well, one of the key things, is the examples that we've seen recently. One of the things that we focus now on are things like DDoS attacks, right? And potentially other sorts of entities trying to gain access to our systems. I mentioned earlier CBP1, as we were, allowing people from, the Central America, South America, to, try and access our systems. We also found out that there are people beyond that zone trying to access our systems as well. So it's really heightened our overall security focus. And we saw the same thing a couple of times from other areas and other programs to include other, automation is happening all over, right? So if a business excuse me, if a business is running a process to try and gain access to a system to actually not do anything bad, but to facilitate their business, right? An automated way puts them, if you keep queuing, put them to the front of the line, can actually turn into an attack without it being actually meant to be an attack. So we are highly focused on looking at those kinds of things. It hasn't changed, as Mr. Clark says, but we were definitely much more sensitive now to watching what's occurring than even we were a year ago. And I think that's because we're learning as the environment's changing. One of the things I can tell you about information technology is that, it's rapidly progressing, and the standard that may happen, today, may not be the same 10 days from now or 6 months from now. It's just moving that fast. So you have to be adaptive, you have to be agile.
All right. In the time we have left, Matt, we'll go to you for some final thoughts on lessons learned in all of this. And, again, maybe reiterate what people should be thinking about as agencies move to deeper into the cloud and more critical in the applications they deploy there.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. So, definitely in terms of lessons learned, I think, properly managing and optimizing cloud costs. I think that's probably everyone would agree with that we've learned the significance of continuous monitoring and optimization of cloud resources to make sure that the solutions are cost effective. Data interoperability we touched on earlier. So, across diverse environments, we want to make sure that that interoperability exists. We touched on cybersecurity. So clearly, as the cybersecurity landscape evolves alongside the edge to cloud environment, that's going to require close coordination with our agency partners. And then finally, as data volumes grow at the edge, comprehensive data management strategies are going to be needed. There's going to be a tremendous amount of, there already is, but there's going to be more data produced. And then how that data is exploited using AI and how that value can be brought rapidly to the officers in the field.
All right. Well, it's getting better, but it's not getting any easier, I guess. And we'll always need sharp professionals on the job here. I want to thank today's guests. Dr. Ed Mays is the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Infrastructure and Support Services and Chief of Enterprise Infrastructure at Customs and Border Protection. Richard Clark is the Chief Technology Officer for U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement. And Matt Guillaubaud, the Product Development Director for the Global Security Products Division at Leidos. Thank you all very much. I'm Tom Temin. You're watching Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on the Cloud Exchange.